Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency Decision Day, taking place from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. I am Councillor Kelsey Lerney, Chairperson and Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency. This meeting is audio recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available, and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. If you are joining us online, please turn your camera and microphone off until your item. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? Lastly, please can I remind members and officers to use their microphones and speak directly into them. Please do not turn away when speaking to enable your comments to be picked up on the recording of the meeting. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. It's very pleasing to see so many members of the public at this meeting this morning, and I will invite you forward when it's time for you to make your contribution. Turning to the agenda, we have, does anybody have any declarations of interest to make? No, we have none. Item 2, public participation. I will invite members of the public to speak when it comes round to the item on the agenda. And I note that we also have a number of people observing the meeting today. Visiting councillors representation. Councillor Bolton, I have you down to speak. Are you happy to speak on the agenda item? Thank you. Right, so that brings us to the single item on the agenda, the Carbon Neutrality Roadmap and report of the Winchester District Climate Assembly 2022, which is item DD56. So I'd like to start by inviting Sue Robbins, supported by Anna Wise, to give us a brief resume of the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report and decision is enabling the Council to conclude its work on the carbon neutrality roadmap, which we commenced last year and was considered at the Housing and Policy Committee in December. You will recall that the Council commissioned WSP to undertake a quantitative and qualitative assessment of how, as a district, we could reach our carbon neutrality target by 2030. And the work is provided in the report appended to this report. It concluded that we have a challenge ahead of us. It identified 16 interventions, 3 of which were high impact and could result in the highest carbon reductions in which we should concentrate our efforts. And it also concluded that we needed to work in partnership with our key agencies, our stakeholders and our communities to drive forward action at a pace and to scale up our activities to ensure that we do become carbon neutral as a district by the target date. And I think that's probably all I want to say by way of a summary, Chair, for the report. As I say, it has been considered before and you have had the full report provided to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I'd like to start by inviting representatives of the Climate Assembly Steering Group forward to speak. So we have Francesca Singer-Ince, Joe Crocker, Mike Nell and Cal Phoenix, I believe, today. I'm going to be flexible on time as the report of the Climate Assembly is a fundamental part of the decision we're taking today. So I think you deserve enough time to express yourself properly on that. So if you'd like to come forward.
Along, so Joe has a microphone as well.
Yeah, could you press the button on the microphone, please? When it lights red, then it's working.
And then I can let go. Oh, okay.
That's it.
Okay, is that better?
Much better.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning. My name is Francesca Singer-Ince. I'm here representing the group Winchester Together for Our Planet. And we organised, with the support of the City Council and National Lottery, we organised Winchester District Climate Assembly. And we're delighted to be here today, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and the flexible timing as well. So for those of you that don't know, the Climate Assembly took place last year on the 22nd of October. We were really pleased that we had around 70 people from across Winchester District, from all sorts of backgrounds take part, many of whom had not been involved in climate activism or politics previously. And on the day, those participants had expert testimony on the topics of energy, transport, and our throwaway culture, and they used this evidence to inform discussion, deliberation on a voting process to produce their top priorities for change in the district, which we've called in our report Wins for the Climate. Overall, these Wins for the Climate produced a clear, positive vision of a carbon neutral Winchester district. The participants wanted to see local renewable energy generated, active residents who weren't reliant on their private cars, but were enabled to walk and cycle safely and provided with reliable and affordable buses for longer journeys. They also wanted support for waste-free sustainable businesses, increased land available to grow healthy, seasonal and local food, and new building developments to be powered entirely by clean green energy. Throughout, the participants emphasised the urgency of action and their readiness to play their own part on a personal level. We are delighted to see the many overlaps between the Wins for the Climate and the Council's roadmap to carbon neutrality, and we welcome the opportunity to work together on those interventions which will enable us to move towards our shared vision for Winchester District. We now offer our support to the Council in becoming greener faster, and we look forward to seeing a re-energised and ambitious update to the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, in the knowledge that wide public opinion is firmly behind it. Thank you. I was now going to invite one of our participants, Cal Phoenix, to say a few words, but I don't think he's arrived. Mike, is there anything you wanted to add?
Thing to add is that obviously these recommendations carry a cost, but that every pound you spend today will save many pounds. Sorry, we recognise that these recommendations come at a cost, but that every pound you spend on these recommendations today will save many pounds recovering from climate change problems in the coming few years. It's a wise investment.
Right, to add? Thank you very much. Anything else to add? No,
Thank you.
If Cal does arrive, then we can always invite him to speak as long as he's not too late.
Thank you.
So we'll do that. Right. So moving on to the next set of speakers, we have Chris Holloway, Phil Gagg, David Jones, and Joe Crocker on behalf of Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis.
Thank you very much for inviting us. And I'm going to do the 3 minutes, but I brought my two colleagues because they know much more about the details than I do. So if you want questions on transport or on renewable energy, then they're the people to talk to.
Right.
But overall, I wanted to say that Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis very much welcomes the City Council's recognition of the need to be greener, faster. And on the what to do, you've got the recommendations from WSP consultants, and we've sent you a private note setting out where we agree and where we think they've made a few mistakes. So I'm not going to go into that in detail now. Although I did want to say we were very disappointed that they came up with a set of recommendations that would actually only cut your carbon footprint by a third, unless you spent an enormous amount of money on the other 2/3 offsetting. And we were delighted to hear you say at the last Health and Environment Policy Committee that you had no intention of offsetting 2/3 of the council's footprint. We're very keen to help you develop the next carbon neutrality action plan based on what WSP have said to you, but also on what the Climate Assembly says, and we hope also on our ideas about the way forward. We can help in various ways. We can help check figures you get from consultants. We can help you spot useful things to copy from other authorities that have worked. And we can help, of course, harness the power of public opinion. And we can see other ways that will help you get closer to your emissions target, for example, more on transport and using renewable energy generation to close the gap between reduction and the net zero. So I'm not going to go through the priorities now. What I want to do is to focus on the how rather than the what, to get effective, urgent climate action. And the most important thing of all is leadership. It's great, Kelsey, that you're Councillor Lerney, that you're taking the lead. And you need the lead from all your staff and from your chief executive and from all the other councillors as well. There was a recent government survey that showed that more than 4 out of 5 people want action on the climate. It's not going to be unpopular with the voters, it's going to be popular. You said yourselves you need to scale up actions and increase the pace of delivery, and we absolutely agree. And say, do indeed focus on the actions that will have the biggest and the quickest impact. There are lots of other things you could be thinking about, from nature-based solutions to consumption emissions, but that's not a reason for holding up action now. Get going on the things that we all know are going to be effective, and then once they're working, you can have a look at the others. We'd say, this sounds silly, but don't do anything that's going to increase carbon emissions. And that means looking at ideas that are around for places like Bushfield Park or Bushfield Camp or River Park or Central Winchester, or indeed ideas from other people like the M3 and Southampton Airport. Well done on opposing those. Don't let anything go forward that's going to make emissions greater, and remove any barriers to emissions reduction by other people. For example, the local plan needs to make sure it doesn't stand in the way of commercial renewable energy installations or retrofitting older houses. But finally, and our most important point is exactly what you've said too, about putting carbon at the heart of your relationships with your partners. Given the City Council's limited budget and limited powers, it's absolutely essential that you use your influence to bring everybody together. And we would strongly recommend some form of standing conference with the major partners, which would include the public, but it also includes other public bodies and the private sector. A standing conference of major partners which together agrees on the top priorities for climate action in Winchester District, and together works on doing those, and together monitors how well you're getting on, and together keeps the carbon action plan regularly updated in the light of how far you've got to make net zero a reality. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. I think this would be an opportune moment to ask officers to give a brief update on where we are with offsetting. Sorry, I've rather surprised them with that, but
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, you will recall that we considered a very broad offsetting policy at a policy approach, if you like, at the policy committee last year, the Health Health and Environment Policy Committee last year. And so we have then been taking that very detailed piece of academic work and considering our position. And we have a report coming to Cabinet, I think at the next meeting, on what our approach should be for policy offsetting, so that it complements this activity from the roadmap and builds into a revised carbon neutrality action plan. We saw it very important as being part of that work and not a separate statement or a separate activity. It had to be embedded in with our whole approach to how we look at reduction, elimination, removal, and then offsetting. So that reinforcing that hierarchical approach of doing all we can first before we consider offsetting, but that we had a policy that if we needed to take action, that we could do that now while we had time for it to take effect.
Right, thank you very much. You mentioned that you had support in regards to questions around housing and transport. Given that those are both key areas in which we do need to take action and are included within the roadmap, do you want to have a brief word about both those topics? Phil, if you'd like to talk about transport briefly.
Yes. I think we're worried that so much emphasis is put on the electrification of the private car without linking it to any serious consideration about where the green electricity would come from to power those private cars. And we feel the report could have been better structured if it had looked at where you get electricity from and how it can be greener, as well as reducing the demand. So it does read quite often as if electrification of private cars is going to get rid of emissions. But of course, if it just means we consume electricity generated from gas burning, we'll end up with 2/3 of the emissions, an improvement, but not very great progress. In terms of the domestic analysis, we're alarmed to see that the report underestimated the number of households in Winchester by something like a factor of 5. So all their arithmetic is unreliable. And we do feel that this sort of equation needs to be more seriously addressed in the near future as part of the rewriting of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. And finally, there does seem to be a massive underestimate of the gains that can be made by encouraging active transport. They say there will be marginal gains, but it just seems like a way of cutting carbon begging to be used. And we don't feel that came across at all in the report. And we'd be really pleased if there could be some sort of rebalancing of that discussion.
Right. Thank you. I think that's a really useful contribution. Of course, we've noted that within the Climate Assembly report, then there was an emphasis on leaving cars at home and using other forms of travel rather than simply a focus on electrification. So in essence, carrying on as you are, just a slightly different fuel source. Right, turning to housing.
Well, I'm not actually prepared to talk about housing. I could talk about renewable energy.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor,
Yes, it was renewable energy. Yes.
So yes, David Jones, chair of WINAC's Renewable Energy Action Group. I'd like to make probably 3 points. One is why it's important for the council to set a target for renewable energy generation within the district. Secondly, to describe what that target might look like and in terms of volume and size. And thirdly, to make a point about the limitations of rooftop and brownfield locations for solar renewable energy generation. And therefore, why be a priority for the council. So first of all, And just to point out that the WSP report, I think, was inaccurate in bundling renewable energy generation within emissions reductions, because the production of renewable energy and feeding that into the electricity grid does not in itself reduce emissions. What it does is helps to decarbonize the United Kingdom's electricity grid. Although I do think that it is an important demonstrator for Winchester, as a relatively wealthy district, to be making a fair and equitable contribution to decarbonizing the electricity grid. And in that context, it's important to note that the addition of an electric vehicle onto Winchester's roads, or every additional heat pump that's installed, is adding load onto that national grid. And unless we decarbonize it, that additional load will be delivered through fossil fuels. So there is, if you like, both a practical and a moral and ethical reason for Winchester District to be seen to be making and actually making every possible effort to increase renewable energy generation. So what does that mean for the target? Well, if we look at the government's own policy targets as advised by the Committee on Climate Change, look, by 2030, there's an expectation of an increase in demand for on the national grid of 20%, and by 2035, 50%, and by 2050, 120%. That's driven significantly by the decarbonisation of the transport network and residential and commercial property. So what that would mean in Winchester, and these are provisional figures that the Renewable Energy Action Group have developed, and we'd welcome the opportunity to work with officers to work these up into specific targets. But what we think it means is by 2030 that the district, were it to meet its growing own local electricity demand, would need to be generating in the order of 750 megawatts of renewable energy. And to put it into context, as of today, it's generating around about 100 megawatts. So that's a 7.5-fold increase in 7 years. We think that that's predominantly, well, let's put it this way, the obvious planning opportunity within Winchester District is for solar utility. That means solar farms. And that's because we're a relatively sunny district and we are relatively rural. 750 megawatts, if were it to be entirely delivered through utility solar, which I'll come back to that point in a moment, but were it to be delivered that way, then that might equate to 1,500 hectares of land, which equates to something like 2.5% of Winchester's agricultural land. All these figures approximate and indicative. And my final point regarding rooftop and brownfield solar installations, it is self-evident that the best place to put solar power would be on existing or already despoiled sites. But it is a fact that there just simply isn't the land. And just to put it into context, a typical domestic installation, 3.5 kilowatts, that would require 140 domestic installations to raise the equivalent power of a hectare of farmland, or one single wind turbine at a typical size and in the current efficiency. So WINAC estimates that rooftop solar could potentially, at best, supply 15% of the demand for renewable energy that we would see in 2050. That's all I want to say for now. I'm happy to go into any of those matters in more detail.
Thank you. I suspect we'll take more detail offline rather than deal with it in this meeting. I think that seems an opportune moment to talk about Appendix 3 of the report, which is the implementation process for the carbon neutrality roadmap, because clearly that's key to what you're talking about. It's not just about what's in the roadmap paper, but what we actually do with it next. So I'd like to invite Anna Wise just to say just to give a few remarks about what the process is going to be from here.
So both Sue and myself will be working on the roadmap. It is advice received to the council, and thank you to WINAC, who have provided some very detailed thoughts on it as well, and to the stakeholders present who participated in workshops as it was written. The aim is, I think we'll be working internally with colleagues in the council and Hampshire and the other groups, because it's not just the responsibility of the council to deliver it. We do have to work, across the Winchester district with the council and businesses and other organisations delivering it. But the recommendations will feed into a revision of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan over the course of this year, and then that will go through the approval process and consultation process. That will include involvement of stakeholders, as well as obviously quite intense work by council.
Yeah.
Do you want to add?
Thank you. That covers it very well. I think it's just important to reiterate that, as you say, this is advice received, and we now want to take it forward and look at as you were describing, the how and not just the what. So I think we see the CNAP as an excellent vehicle for enabling us to do that. We've had that document for a couple of years now, and we've rolled it over. I think it's an opportunity to really refresh what we do with stakeholders, and that revised plan will be an opportunity for that.
Right, thank you, and thank you for your contribution to the meeting. I'd now like to invite Danny Lee to speak.
Good morning, Councillor Kelsey. Good morning, everybody. Shall I start now?
Yes, yes,
okay,
please do.
Great. So I'm Danny Lee. I'm a resident in the district. I'm a member of WINAC, and some of the points that were raised by Chris in terms of the response to the carbon neutrality roadmap and plan will be based on nature-based solution concerns, which I'm going to elaborate on. What I firstly wanted to say is to applaud the council. I'd like to congratulate the progress on the emerging local plan with the essential aspects on carbon neutrality and the improved nature aspects. And I think that's particularly important, along with the updated biodiversity action plan. These are all key given the interlinked and interdependent climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So that's very pleasing to see. However, I believe that the Council can improve the outlook. It's picking up on a bit of the how and the what, which has already been mentioned. We can improve the outlook for the carbon neutrality roadmap and its delivery by adding some other interlinked and supporting aspects. And I already mentioned some of the key plans. The first big concern is the COP26, 27 and the COP15 outcomes, which are quite recent, and I don't think they've been factored into the carbon neutrality plan and roadmap in the way that perhaps they should be, given that they were clearly only digested after the fact. The point is that we need to halt and reverse biodiversity because biodiversity is a key enabler to decarbonize, and I'll expand on that in a minute. We need to protect and restore and expand our natural ecosystems, which is now more urgent than ever. This needs to be, I believe, more upfront and centered to the roadmap and all the plans and interlinked. The ecosystem benefits are invisible in economic decisions making, which leads to overexploitation, and that's a concern, given its enabling capacity to decarbonize. And let's not forget that the end game of all the plans is a transition to a green economy, and arguably the fact that the roadmap talks about in only one intervention, nature-based solutions, is quite disappointing. The allied concern is that I could not see where or how the council will create a state of nature report. And I'm thinking about the Durham County approach. This is much needed in terms of the identification and the status of the quality and quantity of our local biodiversity and ecosystems. As we know, ecosystems have both the direct and indirect contributions to our well-being and to help decarbonisation. They provide a combination of nature provisioning, regulating and supporting services for our survival and the fight against climate change, without which we are, I think, going to be constrained or we could be defeated. So can I point you to the South Downs National Park mapping ecosystem exemplar, and there are other examples available. And so I think without a clear understanding of the local state of nature and the requirement under the new Environmental Act, requiring the council to prepare local nature recovery solutions, strategies, I believe you will be hampered. And I suggest that some of the evidence, which is good practice out there, is that you could enhance the capacity to do this with also greater geospatial data, which will show you how to reduce emissions by up to 15% by 2030. And I can point you to some examples based on the economic reports that I've seen. So the absence of a state of nature report with relevant geospatial nature-based information, I believe, is a significant missing ingredient for carbon neutrality and the protection of nature. So just to unpick that a little bit further, yes, the Biodiversity Action Plan is reviewed annually, as I understand, and there's a more substantial review to be undertaken in 2026. Solutions to enhance the carbon neutrality roadmap delivery. And of course, what I'm suggesting here is more than just priorities for conservation of species and habitats, or land characteristics or green infrastructure, as we know is articulated in the local plan. It's more than that. It's building on the habitat methodology, woodland codes, and all that sort of stuff, which is in the carbon neutrality report, which is great. But the council doesn't have a clear understanding of where the best carbon sequestration soils and flora are, where are the highest nectar footprints, pollinating services, where are the best soil and carbon sequestration opportunities. The provisioning, supporting, and the regulating ecosystems must be made more robust. They need to be protected, they need to be improved if you're going to have a chance of mitigating and adapting to climate change. So the other factor I just want to quickly touch on is part and parcel of nature-based solutions is carbon neutrality. In carbon neutrality is whole life carbon. You've got the LETI energy standard, which is great, and the adoption of that will take forward action on operational carbon, but it emits embodied carbon. LETI has a standard for embodied carbon, and that could be easily adopted by the council for the carbon neutrality roadmap and for the local plan, because they go hand in hand. So in sum, I hope in the tight financial situation that we all find ourselves in, that council can find a way to develop and adopt nature-based solutions. And I'll just pick out a couple of facts that nature can play.
Can I ask you to bring your
I'll just finish the emphasis on nature-based. So nature can play a fundamental role in achieving net zero with the capacity to deliver 1/3 cost-effective solutions for climate change. And I think if you use engineering solutions, they are 4 to 10 times more expensive than nature-based approaches. So can I suggest that the offsetting mentioned in terms of your approach might lend itself to a supplementary planning document and something more for the carbon neutrality plan. I believe that also a nature-based supplementary planning document with an enhanced biodiversity action plan would be great, because you're about to update and provide an SPD for biodiversity for the local plan. And finally, for sustainability and construction, an SPD in the same mode as East Hants District Council would also enhance your ability to deliver carbon neutrality and obviously work on the biodiversity ecosystem protection.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I don't have the relevant colleagues in the room today, but I will certainly discuss the matters you've raised with them outside the meeting. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Right. So final public speaker, I have Councillor Rob Feck from Colden Common.
Thank you very much, Chair, for inviting me up. Given that you're taking a top-down view of this plan is more of a top-down view, which obviously requires somebody with a brain the size of a planet to actually pull together. I'd like to give you a bottoms-up view, if I may, with the challenges that we have from at a parish council level. We have over the last year, or longer than that, we built a strategy based on interviews of a representative sample of parishioners, using a very robust research method to achieve that. That's resulted in an action plan and also a partial restructure of the parish council. So now there is a strategy group which is now at the heart, or will be at the heart, of the parish council. And we've also established a group of people external to the parish council to act as a special group of special advisory group of experts. Now, we're in the process now of effectively producing a rollout plan, which just from the parish council's capital estate would be relatively straightforward to put solar panels, for example, and improve the efficiency of the buildings. The challenge is, where do we get the money from to actually do that? So that's my question to you, is where would we raise the funds to actually achieve that? Now, it could be that we do that through the precept, which means that the rollout plan for that is going to take quite a bit of time to actually raise that sort of money, or there could be grants available. However, looking at the buildings, there is the possibility to exceed the net zero target that we've got, which means that we could, for example, sell some of that roof space to other organisations that might need, who can't put, or parishioners, for example, who have north-facing roofs, and therefore they would want to offset their carbon footprint, haven't got the ability to do so on their building, but they could do on part of the parish council building. Now, if you scale that up, there must be other parish council buildings in the district as well that may be in the same position. So one of the things that would be very useful to have is there a common scheme that basically each of the parish councils could say, we have this excess available, therefore can we sell that excess? That would provide a revenue stream for the parish council. So that's just one thing that you might need to consider. But ultimately, it comes down.
Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Beck. Actually, this is an area where we have been doing some work, and we have helped a number of organisations put solar panels on their buildings. Mrs. Robbins, did you want to say something about that and where we are with that programme?
I can certainly say some about grants. Ms. Wise might be able to say more about the wider scheme about the PV on roofs. But with regards to grants, we do seek to offer up funding to support green measures, and we have put in an investment plan for the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which sets as a priority green measures for communities across our rural district, and we will be looking to possibly launch a fund that could assist with that type of activity. We're waiting the government announcement on that, but we recognise it's really important to fund these sorts of activities, and that's why we've made that a priority and the largest element of that investment plan. So wait to hear on that one, but we will look to fund through other grant programmes where we can. So we can put our funding development officer in touch with you to explore any of those opportunities. Useful. But I'll let Ms. Wise talk more about the wider scheme. Thank you.
Just in terms of funding, there's a funding webinar coming up either this week or next week. So if you search for Winchester City Council on Eventbrite, you can register to attend a funding webinar. I'd also point you towards SIL funding, which is open for applications January and March this year, and is certainly welcoming sustainability measures, and there's full details on eligibility, and the application form can be found on our website. We have a contract with a company to provide economic support, particularly with low case funding, which is low carbon across. That fund closes this spring. So if you want to obtain some match funding, for example, for funding or funding source that requires match funding, I would encourage you to get application in that fairly soon. And then for people with well-developed projects, there is the Platinum Village Hall Fund, but that closes at the end of this week, which again funds sustainability measures. It only opened, I think, for 1 month, but they've got 3 million that they are giving grants for sustainability and other measures to improve community.
Right. Thank you very much. And I think this is an area in which we're seeking to do more. So although we're already doing a lot, we are really keen to promote this kind of activity, particularly because we know it really helps with the sustainability of community buildings financially, as well as in terms of their carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think it's important that Parish Council leads by example for the rest of the parishioners. I think the big issue that we have is how then do we get parishioners to actually start doing their work as well. And one of the outcomes of the research that we did was that basically that in our particular location, they're mainly time poor. So what we see is a cliff occurring where existing volunteers will no longer be able to volunteer and there won't be anybody to backfill them. So we see that as a very critical part of our strategy, is how do we actually build volunteer sustainability within the village. It's just proving to be very difficult. Even we've got 40 plus organisations in the village and they're mainly run by seniors.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Councillor Veck. Right, I'll now move on to visiting councillors. So, Councillor Bolton, would you like to come forward and speak?
Testing, I think I've got that right. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you this morning in my new role, all of 1 week. Please allow me to start by first extending my thanks to Frank Pearson, whose knowledge and expertise in all things environmental is legion. I will do my best, but no doubt fail to fill those considerable shoes. This week has been a rapid learning curve with much more to come, but I have the benefit of approaching this with a fresh pair of eyes and have a number of observations and questions for you that you may wish to consider and reply now or give a written response to later. WSP have produced a detailed paper on a very important issue. However, it appears to have taken a long time to get to this stage, given the pressing timeline since declaring the 2030 net zero target across the district back in 2019. Global clock is ticking, and this agenda item is a recommendation to adopt this roadmap as the evidence base from which to develop a future carbon reduction strategy. This document remains a high-level proposal. When will this materialise into a strategy and action plans? Since the administration declared a climate emergency, the reduction of CO2 is almost certainly entirely down to the continued decarbonisation of the electricity grid and little to do with any action by the administration. This is further illustrated by the model 2030 CO2 reduction from a baseline of 634 kilotons of CO2, which will only achieve a reduction of 7.5 kilotons. To achieve net zero by 2030, proposed and even now leave a shortfall of 377 kilotons of CO2 to be offset by the purchase of carbon credits. The 7.4 million cost to offset 377 kilotons of CO2 in 2030 is based on today's prices of carbon credits at £20 per tonne. In the unlikely event that the carbon credits remain at this level, it will still amount to around 50 million for the years 2030 to 2050. WSP in this roadmap warned that the cost could rise to around £300 per tonne by 2050 due to rising demand and limited supply, which could see that number rise by anywhere upwards of a factor of 10. That would mean in excess of 500 million to offset CO2 for 20 years. In the CNAP, it quotes the UN Environmental Programme, achieving net zero carbon emissions by balancing a measured amount of carbon released with an equivalent amount sequestered or offset. For the UN, whose jurisdiction is worldwide, offsetting CO2 emissions that cannot be avoided in one part of the world by planting trees in another part can make for a sensible strategy. However, paying potentially hundreds of millions of pounds of Winchester residents' money into carbon credits to be spent elsewhere in the world other than our district cannot be allowed to happen. Rather than spending on carbon credits, this money should be focused more on schemes promoting the domestic interventions that would bring the greatest long-term savings to residents and benefits more the vulnerable, at the same time accelerating a strategy to achieve carbon neutrality. The roadmap argues that carbon neutrality is achievable by 2050. I think this is failing, this microphone.
Get to the next one along, Councillor Bolton.
Thanks, Claire. The roadmap argues that carbon neutrality is achieved. The roadmap argues that carbon neutrality is achievable by 2050 with the application of proposed 16 interventions in line with government and county strategy with minimal carbon credit offset. It is a commendable goal to reach carbon neutrality before 2050, but the 2030 target could rapidly become a vanity project that has an offset price tag, which is unachievable and totally unaffordable, requiring the justification of pouring hundreds of millions out of the district and county. Will you agree consideration will be given to bringing the district net zero target date in line with the county and with the government to 2050? Like many models, there are many imperfect assumptions within this that are amplified horribly by the passage of time. The 30 years over which this is to be achieved will present lengthy and complex issues, including some of the following that need addressing in a future strategy and action plan. What will the view of the South Downs National Park be to proposed wind farm and solar farms? How will planning laws be changed to allow for large-scale projects of this nature? How will domestic interventions be adapted considerately for the preservation of listed buildings? Transport interventions on hybrid working rely on functioning broadband in the wider district, which is non-existent for thousands of residents outside the major towns. How will the administration bring more rapid solutions to this problem? How will the competing interests be managed between changing habitats by planting trees for carbon sequestration versus managing downland habitats with more marginal sequestration, but no less valuable biodiversity? What about ongoing maintenance of these new woodlands? WCC has limited ability to influence transport. This will depend on HCC and government funding. Is this not another case for alignment of strategy? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I think alongside most other people in this room, I'm actually horrified by your suggestion that we align with the government and county council rather than striving for what we know is an incredibly challenging target, but one that is supported by scientific consensus. As a district, I think we have to show that leadership and not just say this is all too difficult. There are all these things which are very hard. There are all these competing objectives. I think we recognise all that, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try our damned hardest to reach those targets.
And I think you'll find I said that.
Set.
To actually rapidly escalate this rather than just
Councillor Bolton, I'm speaking and I'm in the chair. Clearly we have, as has been mentioned, our offsetting policy coming forward, and we have a whole series of other strategies which will come forward, not only the carbon neutrality action plan, but a series of other plans and strategies which will deal with a lot of those issues that you've been talking about, and where we're already seeing action. We're not actually waiting to write a lot of these plans before taking action, but we're moving ahead wherever we can. But thank you for your comments, and clearly we'll take those on board.
Could I mention, ask for one clarification?
A single clarification.
Thank you. One of our colleagues a moment ago mentioned about 750 megawatts of solar PV requiring, I thought you said 1,500 acres, and I think it's 15,000 hectares, I should say, and it's 15,000, I believe, which is 60 square miles.
Thank you. We're not
Okay.
going to have a technical argument in the room. Clearly, those need to be taken offline. So,
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. It seems appropriate now, given the topic under consideration and its importance, that the leader has actually arrived in the meeting, and I believe would like to say a few words.
So, sorry, phones are out, so if you could use the ones on the end, that's great.
What was that? Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lerny, and thank you everybody for coming along today. It's great to see so many people here. Unfortunately, I had a meeting that ran till 10, otherwise I would have joined you from the very beginning. But I do intend to watch the deputations back and hear what everybody had to say. I suppose the perspective I'd like to bring to this is that although Councillor Lerny is sitting here today as the Cabinet Member for the climate emergency, the priority of, as we will be adopting in our updated council plan, of going greener faster, recognising the need to accelerate our work, is something that is a total council priority. It's not something where we're just saying that this is a small part of the organisation, the bit that counts, well, it's quite a big part of the organisation that Councillor Lerny is responsible for and that Mrs. Adey is responsible for, but that it is something that will be embedded and worked through in absolutely everything that we're doing.
I've recently been asked by the county to have regular meetings with their leadership, and the framing that they wanted us to talk about was about economic regeneration and the future of the county and our role as a district within that. I've made it very clear that from our point of view, the number one conversation that we will be wanting to have, alongside those other things, will be about carbon, because it is something that is so central to what it is that we're doing. So I'm very pleased and very pleased that we have the paper coming forward today that sets out what is undoubtedly the substantial challenge to achieve the 2030 objective that has been discussed today, and that remains our objective despite any requests to slow the process down. I'm also really pleased that people have come together through the Climate Assembly to review, to get input in terms of what they think we need to be doing to accelerate the work. And I can only give you my commitment that the administration here, not just the people you see in this room, but the entire organisation will be giving the challenges that are laid out in front of us the priority that I think everybody here thinks that they deserve.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Todd. We've heard from all our public speakers, and I would like to thank all of them today for their contributions. Winchester for the Planet, for the Climate Assembly, our officers for the work that has been done to bring the roadmap forward, and as the leader has demonstrated, fellow members of Cabinet for continuing to make this area of work the overarching priority of this council. The carbon neutrality roadmap is an important evidence base quantifying the scale of the mountain we need to climb to achieve a zero carbon city council and district. It not only shows the size of the task, it shows that the City Council cannot do this on our own, and nor do we intend to. Having attended the Climate Assembly in an observer role, I was pleased to see a really good cross-section of our local population, certainly a much better cross-section than we normally see at these kind of events. A consensus was reached, which included the urgent need for action, as well as a number of key action areas, and the need to consider fairness and the equality impacts of this area of work. Those outcomes from the Assembly's support, but are not confined to the roadmap. And in receiving the report today, it's our intention to take it forward in many other contexts, including the local plan, Winchester Movement Strategy, the district local walking and cycling infrastructure plan, waste and recycling strategy, community infrastructure levy spending, and our plans to communicate with residents. There are many more, you know, by the Biodiversity Action Plan, for example, which we definitely aren't forgetting. The scientific consensus does support the City Council's targets, and many other organisations and businesses are adopting similar timescales. Clearly, however, we do need, as the roadmap suggests, to use the levers at our disposal, and as a City Council, campaign for the County Council and central government to do more, and not just revert to fossil fuel guzzling type as soon as anything gets difficult. We have to ensure that we take our local businesses and residents with us on the journey to zero carbon. And that's going to be a very important area of our work, to demonstrate that leadership, but also to tell people why this is important and why it will be actually good for their lives. The timescales for a revised carbon neutrality action plan, and importantly, the associated funding plan development are set out in Appendix 3. But we aren't going to delay working on actions within the roadmap, the Climate Assembly report, or the other documents that we already have in place as that is developed. we do now have a much stronger evidence base for prioritising what we should do with the council's limited resources, and will push on with our greener, faster agenda. So the recommendations on the paper are that, one, that the carbon neutrality roadmap October 2022 be used as the evidence base from which to develop future carbon reduction strategy, that it be adopted, and that the Winchester District Climate Assembly 2022 report of Winchester Together for Our Planet and WINAC be received and noted. So I will be signing that decision record, and I'd like to thank everybody for their contribution to the meeting today. So thank you, and we'll bring the meeting to a close.